A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, we do like to check in with Christian commentator David Robertson today, talking about the good news, the gospel in Australia, and how we communicate it. David writes for newspapers, for magazines. He's the author of a number of books. He's also the minister at Scots Kirk Presbyterian Church in Newcastle. And his insightful blog is called The Wee Flea. You can find that at theweeflea.com. His latest book is called Seek. And David, always a pleasure. Welcome back to 2020.
Yeah, it is a pleasure. It's as you were observing earlier, I'm rugged up. I'm a Scotsman who's now acclimatized to Australia and who feels that 15 degrees is cold. And I'm actually about to head to Melbourne the weekend, and I nearly had a heart attack when I looked and saw it's due to be 12. And I thought, I can't cope. And 12 used to be summer for me.
And I might just say I didn't even wear a jumper to work this morning. Hey, we're talking evangelism, and, you know, sometimes it's an uncomfortable topic for people who are not so confident or have their own views about it. But I wonder if we might just start around the importance of evangelism as a part of the life of a Christian believer. What are your thoughts here?
Well, I think I want to stress it's an important part of the church, and we're part of the church. And I think evangelism is greatly misunderstood. Christians will generally say, it's a good thing, but often it's other people who do it, or even, dare I say it, people who do it are sometimes a bit weird. I want to suggest that we need to look at, first of all, our motivations. So if we believe what the Bible says, then we will really want to communicate the good news of Christ to other people. I mean, there are different reasons for doing that, but I think it's an absolute imperative that we do so. And then we need to think about how we do that. But I would argue that Australia needs, more than anything else, the communication of the good news of the gospel. And Christian radio is part of that, and we need to think about it. Individuals are part of that. The church as a whole is part of that. I used to say, I worked for Sydney Anglicans as a Presbyterian for a while, and I used to say that my aim was that in every congregation would have in its DNA evangelism. And I think a lot of us kind of have it as an optional extra, you know, and we've got to rethink that.
So we've got to, in some ways, reevaluate even our own personal thinking to normalise it as a part of our usual everyday Christian experience. Because, as you say, sometimes it's sidelined or it's put into the hands of the specialised few who sometimes look a little bit weird. But normalising it, that's I guess that's something you can do a self-evaluation, David, and say, is this a normal part of the way I think and I behave, and is it normal part of my conversation?
Yeah, so I mean, you can... people can get themselves in an enormous amount of angst about this. They think, it depends what evangelism is. I say we collectively do it as a church. So just as a personal example, you get up this morning, and I get up, and, I live in a townhouse. We've got neighbors on either side. Well, am I a good witness to my neighbors? How I treat them, how we communicate, and so on. If I never ever speak to them, then there's not much point in me turning up their door with a tract or something, never having spoken to them. It's a similar thing when I'm in, there's a famous street in Newcastle called Beaumont Street. There's a lot of cafes and restaurants, and my church is just right beside it. And I walk along that street and talk to people. How I treat people in our church, when people come in, how do we welcome them? How are they treated? And then this just at work, do we have a desire to share the gospel? Now, we don't go to work to preach at people, but the fact is that, as Peter says, we've always to be ready to give an answer or a reason for the hope that we have, and that implies that people are asking questions. So I think it's more, I think rather than think individually first, we should think collectively. How do we, is my church communicating the gospel? How do we do that? Is the whole church doing that? How are a group of churches in an area doing that? How is Christian media doing that? And then I think individually, we need to think, is my light so shining before men that they glorify my Father in heaven? Is it the case that, when I die, that people would be able to say, that they knew that I was a Christian? Or have they never heard anything from me? Have I kept quiet? So I remember giving one example. I was speaking at an outreach event in a bookshop, and afterwards, one of the organizers phoned me up the next day laughing, and he said there was a woman who worked in his company. He was a director in a company, and this woman worked as a secretary to one of his fellow directors, and she'd been at the meeting, and she came in and she said to her director, or her boss, "I've got something to tell you." Was that? We said, "Well, I've worked with you for 10 years. I've never said anything or even admitted to it, but I was at a meeting, but I want to tell you that I am a Christian." And he said, "Oh, what made you bring that about?" He was quite amused. What made you say that? He said, "Well, I was at a meeting last night and I just realized I didn't need to be ashamed." And I think that's actually a very basic thing for an awful lot of listeners is we don't need to be ashamed and we don't need to be scared. We don't need to be arrogant. We don't need to be boastful. We don't need to force it down people's throats, but we don't need to be ashamed.
There's a certain lack of confidence that some people, or I might even say a lot of Christian believers have in communicating the message. But a little bit of inspiration that you just shared there, just saying, "I'm a Christian." Now that brings up all sorts of images that people might have and judgments that they might have about Christians, but just getting that out there, I guess in some ways breaks the ice. For some, it's going to be, I'm thrown into the deep end. Now I've got to actually articulate what I do believe, because maybe I haven't had to do that before. If I didn't say that I'm a Christian, I haven't had to defend that. But there's a certain sense in which just saying I'm a Christian is a very powerful start.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm amused, whenever I take an Uber in West Sydney or something, I often get picked up by guys who, they've got the big crosses on their Orthodox crosses on their windscreens, or hanging around their necks. And they're utterly unashamed about that. Incidentally, I've been picked up by Muslim drivers who are utterly unashamed about their faith. I was once evangelized by a Muslim on the way to Sydney Airport. So that was really interesting. We had a fascinating conversation. So, I'm just saying we don't need to be preaching at people. We don't need to constantly be saying, okay, I need to get this in or get that in. It's our whole lives are permeated by the fact that we follow Christ and that there is something different. I mean, I know when I worked on a farm for a while, or I remember working in a charity for disabled people, and I never said a word, but people did ask me, why don't you do this? Why don't you swear? Why don't you laugh at our dirty jokes? Why, are you some kind of religious person? I didn't have to wear a Jesus loves you t-shirt and carry a big black Bible and thump it down on the canteen table. It was just people can soon work things out. And I remember hearing Tim Keller from New York saying that he would say, his older self would say to his 30-year-old self as a pastor that he wouldn't give his people evangelism programs. He would sit down with them and say to them, what 3 questions are you most afraid of being asked? And then discuss that through with them. Because I think that's where part of the fear comes from. Oh, you're a Christian. Why are you so homophobic? Or, oh, you're a Christian. Here up in Newcastle and Maitland, it was a centre for, sadly, child abuse by clergy. And so there are Christians who still feel, well, I'm going to be asked about that. And how do I deal with that? And so I think you're right. The phrase you use, there's a lack of confidence. It's something, Neil, that's very interesting. Your best natural evangelists tend to be people who've just become Christians because they know it works. It's just worked on them. It's almost instinctive to them. And I think what's happened to many of us as we've gone on is we've lost that natural aspect of it, or even that supernatural aspect of it. And we've turned to methodologies and programs and so on, which I'm not decrying that we can use them, but they're tools. They're not the substance. And I think we need to get back to this natural enthusiasm and love for the Lord.
David, we are relatively still very free to be able to talk about our faith wherever we want to talk about it. Sometimes, and of course on a program like this, we'll unpack all sorts of issues, anti-discrimination laws and those things that might be threatening to restrict our religious expression, and that does affect a lot of people. But ordinary people are still relatively free, and sometimes I suspect we need to celebrate that a little more and not feel as though we are under pressure, because we do have freedom to be able to share our faith, don't we?
Yeah, well, I think we need to use use our freedom wisely. I mean, again, another personal example, because I in a sense, this is my job, but I do it all the time. I mean, it's not I don't do it because it's my job. But, I'm a pastor in a church, but I'm in a church that was absolutely tiny. And the only way it's going to grow is through evangelism. I think most churches, and it's easier to grow a church through attracting people who already go to church. But I think we need more people to come who don't know Christ as yet. I remember I enjoyed playing chess, and I was part of a chess club. And I always thought it was really quite funny. I didn't tell them what I did. People ask you, what's your name? What do you do? Until after about 6 months, they'd worked out that I was either an undercover police detective or a drug dealer. And, and then I had to tell them, okay, hey, I'm actually a pastor. I'm a Presbyterian minister. And, there was all kinds of jokes and about making bishops' moves and cheating by getting God to help me and all that kind of stuff. But, you get good banter with the guys. And it was strange because I think actually getting to know them first, if I'd gone in with a Jesus is my king, T-shirt with a chess piece on it or something, I don't think that would have been great. I just think evangelism is, we've got good news. We want to share it with people. Another way of putting it, when my son was born, it was 3:00 in the morning in the Scottish Highlands. I went out for a walk at 4:00 in the morning, just briefly. Listen, I didn't care whoever you were. I was going to tell you. Actually, it was a village, so everyone knew anyway. It's that kind of place. But what I'm saying is, there's a thing that there's a word for preaching in Acts. There's several words that are used, but one is, you could translate it, gossiping the gospel. It's, what's the gossip? And instead of the gossip being negative or moaning about people or whatever, we can gossip good news. We've got good news for you.
What do you think about the nagging doubts that some people have around their own experience? Because we live in a very secularized world, and if you're exposed to any mainstream media, it's all very secular. There's all sorts of activism out there that wants to suppress Christianity. There's even people trying to revise Christianity out of our history, and they're changing the education curriculum, all sorts of things. It's a very secularized world, and so these things impact on us. I imagine some level of relationship, encouragement, perhaps even routine in your church attendance, just those sorts of things support your ability to be able to be confident and to recognize that there's something important in the purpose that we have in sharing this gospel. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so again, I'm a little bit unusual. I am a pastor, minister, evangelist. I've tried doing evangelism in a sense out with the church, and it can be done, obviously. And in a sense, I've tried doing church without evangelism. But for me, I just always combine the two. And what that means for me is this: that the congregation comes on Sunday. Some are not believers. Some are really struggling. Some are not sure. They're all different backgrounds. But there are people who are believers, and I almost regard it like you're coming on a Sunday, and it's like you're coming into a petrol station and you're getting a refill. And I want to fill people up with confidence and hope and give them good examples and encourage them. And then they go out the next week, and in effect, I want them to burn it all, to use it all, and come back the next week empty and ready for more. Now, I would argue that in our prayer life and in our personal Bible reading, you can use the same analogy. But for me, there's something about collectively being together. I love the idea. So I went to watch Newcastle Jets. I've become Australian and now call it the soccer team. It's really the football team here. But I went to watch them, and I actually loved it. I loved being in the stadium. I loved, I want to go. Having been there, I wanted to go and tell people. What I want people to come to church and to go away with such a buzz that they want to tell people. You're much more likely to go to a restaurant where someone comes away and says, hey, I had a great meal there. You should go to that place. And it's the same with the church. Hey, you should see where I was yesterday. You should hear what I heard yesterday. If you do that, you're much more likely to encourage people to come and hear the gospel.
And if you are a confident witness, qualifying that, we're all witnesses. Not everyone sees themselves as an evangelist, but we're all called to be witnesses. You're not just doing outreaching, but you're also role modelling for others, your Christian lifestyle. So you've got to take care around that too, haven't you? Taking opportunities where you can, but recognising it's not just the person who's a non-believer, but also the believers in being a role model as to how your lifestyle reflects your desire to share your faith.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the worst witness is the person who goes around and proclaims the gospel and then goes home and is bad to their family or cheats in their business or, is one thing in church and another thing with friends. That hypocrisy, that's appalling. So yes, we have to be really, really careful about that. What I would say with the confidence, though, I think, again, I think the theme of what we're talking about is largely confidence. This is the absolute key. Our confidence is not in ourselves or our own ability. We'll soon get flattened if that happens. Our confidence is not even in the church. I would suggest, although I think, again, it's good to belong to a church that you feel confident you can invite people to. I don't think I'd belong to a church I couldn't invite people to. But our confidence is ultimately in the Lord. And for me, God promises that his word won't return to him empty, that it's powerful and so on. He promises his Holy Spirit that he'll be with us. And, I have an absolute confidence in Jesus Christ. It's not a confidence in myself. It's a confidence that Jesus is who he is, that he did what he said he did, that he means what he says, and he wants us to go out and share it with everyone, and that he is to be presented to everyone. And I firmly believe that. I'm here in Newcastle, and what was said to Paul, I think, was it Corinth, Thessalonica? I can't remember. I have many people yet in this city. Well, I think God has many people yet in this city, and we have to go out and find them wherever we are.
Well, always so good getting your insights, David Robertson. We can go away from a conversation like this feeling encouraged, feeling inspired. Fabulous stuff. And there you are working away at the Scots Kirk Presbyterian Church in Newcastle. And listeners today, no matter where you are, all around Australia, in fact, lots of listeners too, coming in and listening to podcasts and all sorts of things all around the world, you can look at the blog, the WeFlea.com, and get lots of great insights as David is writing about some of these key issues around our faith. He's also, his latest book is called Seek. You might want to keep an eye out for that. But theweflea.com to connect with David Robertson. David, thanks so much for more great insights today on 2020.
Great being with you, and enjoy the rest of your conversations. They sound fascinating.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.